We are at about the midway point in June right now. I think it's about time that we start talking a little bit of early redraft content, best ball content. So in today's video, we're going to break down our top 24 overall rankings for redraft leagues, like our way too early version of it. Of course, you can go on Underdog and use these rankings right now. But for the most part, we'll be talking about your managed leagues, your home leagues, for those of you guys that watch this channel to get advice for those. So this one should be really interesting. We're going to talk through some tier breaks, talk through, the best places to pick from in the first round and that kind of stuff. Should be a fun one. Danny, what's up? How you doing?
Doing well, doing well. And yeah, you guys would have watched us talk all Dynasty this offseason. Well, we're finally getting into some redraft content. And what better way than going over the first two rounds of your draft? A lot of people will say, like, oh, you can't lose your draft in the first two rounds, but you can or you can't win your draft in the first two rounds, but you can definitely lose it. We'll show you some guys, we'll show you some valuations that point blank simple at this current rate, we find as absolute league winners in this early portion of the draft.
Yeah, for sure. So let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it. All right, so we're now into the rankings tier list. There's a lot of information flying at you fast and furious right off the bat, but we are going to kind of go through each tier, talk about the best spot to draft from and, the tier breaks and like the outlooks of each of these players briefly. So I have my rankings on the screen right now. We're going to kind of go back and forth if we have any disagreements and that kind of thing. But to me, there's a very clear top two where I would love to pick from. And we are doing this under the assumption that it is a one quarterback league, a PPR format as well. Hence why you see these wide receivers highly, highly valued. I'm sure if you go to like more standard leagues or, half PPR or more like casual redraft centric home leagues, the running back position might be pushed up the board a little bit more than we have it here. But for us, the top two guys are the LSU Tigers, Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. You have two wide receivers in the early portion of their prime, 23, 24 years old, attached to quarterbacks that are going to feed them 170 plus targets. To me, Justin Jefferson is the clear 101, Jamar Chase the clear 102. And I mean, these guys are pretty straightforward. I don't think we need to tell you how good they are.
No, you definitely don't. And it's funny because you'll see a lot of people wonder, like, oh, well, like Justin Jefferson's your clear 101. I get it. He was the wide receiver one last year. But when they brought in TJ Hawkinson, like, how was he affected? And he actually even got better with the offense being stronger as a whole, with Kevin O'Connell running the show, getting a steady tight end, another ancillary option in that offense. In the back half of last year, week 9 to week 17, when you were using him in your fantasy lineups, there's a guy who averaged 12 targets per game, 113.2 receiving yards per game, and 0.7 receiving touchdowns per game, equating to 23.52 PPR points per game in that stretch. He's a young superstar tied to a very good situation there in Minnesota with the play calling, with the quarterback situation as of now going into 2023 with Kirk Cousins. I don't think you should be overthinking it. And same thing for Jamar Chase. You can say that the situation is even better being in that Cincinnati offense tied to Joe Burrow. I would say if I had to bet money that Justin Jefferson probably out-targets him as a whole. But Jamar Chase was still a guy who, when healthy last year, averaged 11 targets per game in the lineup. We know he's got that insulation to that Bengals offense. We know he's tied to Joe Burrow, like I said. These guys are pretty much squeaky clean profiles in terms of what we can project going into redraft this year.
Yeah, and I think you could argue that Chase probably has a little bit higher touchdown upside, 22
Yep.
touchdowns over his first two NFL seasons so far. He actually led the position in route participation to ran every single route of the offense that he was on the field for. So, yeah, I mean, Jamar Chase, deep targets, red zone targets, total touchdowns. He's definitely going to outpace Justin Jefferson probably in that area, but Justin Jefferson, an overall higher target ceiling. 185, 190 targets, 200 potentially in his range of outcomes, whereas Jamar Chase probably around the 150 to 170 range. Still two elite options. These two are clearly the best two players. If somebody gave me the option, where do you want to pick from this year? Maybe you won your league and that's like part of your reward or something like that. I am absolutely very, very clearly picking the 101 for Justin Jefferson or the 102 for Jamar Chase. The next tier down, I have it labeled here as like a cluster of mid-round one type of options. To me, I think 3 might be one of the worst spots to pick from. Not necessarily that I think I'd be upset getting Christian McCaffrey or I'd be upset getting Tyreek Hill or any of the guys that you would value in that area. I just think that all of these guys have their own individual warts to the point that I would just rather have the first or the second pick, or I would rather pick at the tail end of this tier and have a better second rounder as a result. So McCaffrey and Bijan are the only two running backs that I have in this tier. McCaffrey obviously losing some of that, Carolina Panthers workload once he went over to San Francisco, but of course he should be highly, highly involved in the receiving game, should be heavily involved on the goal line. We don't exactly know who's going to play quarterback, but I'm under the assumption that it's probably going to be maybe Trey Lance to start the season, or at least Brock Purdy coming back in time for the season. They've made gestures to say that he could be back in time, but either way, I mean, McCaffrey's a good enough player that I think he should be able to overcome that. I'm just a little bit concerned about the QB situation right now.
Yeah, he's still my clear running back one as well, and the head of this second tier for me. But the big difference between myself and you is that I actually have two more additions in my top tier. As you guys can see, I still have Tyreek Hill and Cooper Kupp in that top tier. Reason being, I understand given the age and given the downside risk that we see from older players potentially, fading off or regressing as a whole. They were so dominant last year to the point where even if they regressed a little bit from league winning type of status, they could still be league winning type of status. And we'll see last year that when Tua Tagovailoa was healthy for Tyreek Hill last year, he averaged over 22 PPR points per game, over 10 targets per game, and over 110 receiving yards per game. Not to mention one of the most efficient wide receivers in the NFL, tied to an extremely potent offense. So for me personally, I do view him in that tier because I do think if you were to line them up after the season, I don't think there's much separating the top four guys in terms of PPR points per game if each of them were to hit their ceilings. I would concede though that they're probably more volatile given the age than the other two guys. And then with Cooper Kupp, I mean, this was a guy averaging nearly 25 PPR points per game, the wide receiver one when he was healthy last year. Concerns about the potential offensive potency, but I do think if Matthew Stafford is healthy, which I guess is a question mark at this current point of the offseason, but if it comes, August 25th and we fully expect Matthew Stafford to be healthy, like, yes, I expect this offense to be worse, but given the pure volume that Cooper Kupp receives, especially in PPR formats, I don't think he should be any lower than the first half of the first round, in my opinion.
Yeah, to me, I have him quite a bit lower than you do for
Yep.
a number of reasons. You kind of just glanced over like the offensive efficiency. Cooper Kupp dealt with injury last year. He's 29 years old. Matthew Stafford dealt with injury last year. He's in his mid 30s at this point in time. Cooper Kupp, we forget, has only been an elite wide receiver realistically for one full season. In terms of like his fantasy point outcome, obviously it was like one of the best receiver seasons we've ever seen from a fantasy receiver. So I'm not ready to say that he's going to fall off a cliff or anything. I just think given the age, given the offensive situation, I am a little bit more concerned about Cooper Kupp, and I would rather get him, 108 or something like that, rather than like spend a top 4 pick on him. To me, I would rather go, as you guys can see there, with McCaffrey, Tyreek Hill, and then I would just go to the running back position with Bijan Robinson, who some people watching this might be like, how the hell do you have a rookie running back this high? But Bijan Robinson, number one, is not like many rookie running backs in the fact that he's already a pro caliber guy. He's going to contribute on all 3 downs. He's going to be a workhorse, given the fact that he was a top 10 pick for an offense that pretty much set records in terms of rush attempts last year. They're going to run the ball yet again. He's probably going to get the majority of all the work that's valuable. Tyler Algier will mix in here and there, but the goal line work, the receiving work, the majority of the carries, it's all going to be Bijan Robinson's. And Arthur Smith, again, the architect of this offense that basically is partially responsible for the prime of Derrick Henry, I think is probably going to lead Bijan Robinson to potentially, by this time in August, be my RB1 over Christian McCaffrey if we have more question marks about Christian McCaffrey's quarterback situation.
The more I think about it going into the year, I do think come August that this guy will be the running back one. I know that sounds hot right now, but if we're contextualizing it, this was a team with the Atlanta Falcons last year that were the second most potent run game behind only the Philadelphia Eagles. And that was with Tyler Algier, Cordell Patterson, some injuries to the offensive situation. Like, this is still a team projecting forward going into the year with a brilliant offensive run scheme mind with Arthur Smith leading the helm, with a top 10 overall pick at running back now with Bijan Robinson, and what graded out as one of the stronger offensive lines in the entire NFL. Not to mention, if you're talking about a pure situation standpoint where the Falcons should probably be in the 2023 season, maybe this is a hot take, but I actually think they're going to win your guys' division. And if this is a 9-10 win type of team over the expectation that some people might have that they might run it back what they were able to do this year, if they're better than people anticipate and this offense is humming and those wide receivers are receivers with Kyle Pitts and Drake London are humming on the outside, and Bijan Robinson has an opportunity to score 12, 15 plus touchdowns this year, given the pure workload he should command, given the draft capital, given the prospect profile, given the fit with this offense, I just don't think that you can view this guy as anything less than a mid-first round pick. And touching upon Christian McCaffrey, you mentioned there's a little bit more downside risk than people realize. Well, in the 3 games, I'm excluding the KC game because he only played 28% of the snaps. So before people go to the comments and be like, well, he didn't play against KC, not included in the sample. In the 3 other games that Elijah Mitchell was healthy and active in the 49ers offense, this is a guy that only got about 17 opportunities per game and about 14.73 PPR points per game. Now, I understand it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle between, a 22 point per game score and a 14.7. But even if McCaffrey finds himself at that 17.5 to 18.5 type of range, you're still including the downside risk that he's a 27-year-old running back that has faced his fair share of injuries in the past. I think personally, some people are going to be going into it, valuing him with the Jefferson and with the Chase. And I would just lay caution that he more so deserves to be in the clear round 1 guys here, in my opinion. And I'll
Yeah,
just
and I
throw
wouldn't
that
be
on screen.
shocked if we got to the end of the offseason and he's talked about as more a guy that you're going to take in the mid round 1, like 6th, 7th overall area, because people are preferring multiple receivers and potentially Bijan over him as well. I also have Diggs and Lamb in this tier. I believe you do as well. And then you
Yep.
have Kelsey there. Also, I mean, with Diggs and Lamb, it's just pretty simple. I don't really need to say anything. We're going to assume for the time being, because this is a way too early situation, that Stephon Diggs, whatever his situation is right now, is resolved. I think it's just frustrations with the offense or whatever. I don't think it's a contract holdout. I don't think it's anything that we need to be extremely worried about for the time being. It sounds like there's more optimism from McDermott and Josh Allen talking about it in press conferences yesterday. So for me, I look at a guy who's the number 1 receiver for one of the best offenses in the league. They were able to add a couple pieces, Dalton Kincaid and Gabriel Davis going into his 4th season, a contract year. I think this offense will be just as good as they've been over the past couple of years. And Josh Allen, of course, with the big arm, hopefully healthy from the UCL injury, should be able to get Diggs back to a 22, 24 point per game type of score like he was in 2020. And then CeeDee Lamb, a young ascending receiver attached to an offense that we project to be very good. They add some pieces around him. Gallup coming back from the ACL tear, 2nd year removed. Brandon Cooks coming in as well. Dalton Schultz leaves, but Tony Pollard is going to help move the offense on the ground. And Dak Prescott, missed half the season or missed a couple games last year as well. So if everybody can stay healthy in Dallas, I think CeeDee Lamb has the potential to become, the next wide receiver 1 overall. And the fact that you can get him in the late 1st round area is definitely something that's really encouraging for me.
Music to my ears that you're in full agreement here, because no, I absolutely agree with the CeeDee Lamb projection. I view this tier as kind of like the 25 plus percent target share elite wide receiver 1s on very good offenses with Stephon Diggs, CeeDee Lamb, and AJ Brown. In terms of CeeDee Lamb last year, like you kind of said, once Dak came back, this was a guy that scored nearly 20 PPR points per game. And I feel like the public's going to downplay that because they're going to talk about, well, he lost, young offensive guru with Kellen Moore. It's like 70+% of the offensive language is going to remain the same in this offense for the Dallas Cowboys. Not to mention, this is a type of player that, according to Matt Harmon, was doubled on about 15% of his routes last year. We know he's going to work in regardless on 2 wide receiver sets, 3 wide receiver sets. He's going to be the main alpha target, but actually having some competent wide receivers on the outside with Michael Gallup projected to make a full recovery now, a full year removed from that ACL injury, and with the addition of Brandon Cooks, who's when healthy, been a 1,000 plus yard wide receiver basically every single year in his NFL career. I think this offensive quote unquote concerns that people are bringing up are overblown. And it starts with CeeDee Lamb because he's going to be, in my opinion, if this offense is humming, a 1,400 plus yard wide receiver that can get to that, 8, 9, 10 plus touchdown type of area. So for me personally, like you kind of said, mid to late round 1 is where he would be going, in my opinion. The one guy that I do have a little bit higher than you would be Travis Kelce. And I know you're going to bring up the downside risk. So I'll just go over the upside case of his scenario. We know he's going to be dominant at the tight end position. We know he's attached to an extremely good offense. We know he's going to be commanding over 25% of Patrick Mahomes' targets. So that would be the upside case. Obviously, if he lives up to that, he would pay off at his, mid first round type of billing. But I'm sure as you'll bring up, the downside case of him being an older tight end is the question mark here.
Yeah, I think this whole 1st round is actually like a little interesting because you have a ton of young ascending players like Jefferson, like Chase, like Bijan, like CeeDee Lamb, some of the guys at the tail end of the 1st round. But I am a little nervous of the amount of players that are in like their 6th NFL season, 7th NFL season, potentially longer in Travis Kelce's case, where these guys, like, I wouldn't be shocked if 2 or 3 of these guys fall off a cliff this year. And again, that's like a gut feeling take. Obviously, you look at Travis Kelce's output and his, projection, and you get so excited. But, sometimes football is a young man's game, and players, lose a step or whatever the case is. So in best ball, I feel comfortable taking them, in the mid first round area. But in a managed, redraft league, I'll probably let one of my league mates draft him, knowing that I can get a different tight end later or stream the tight end position, which obviously you can't do in a best ball format. I have a couple running backs a little higher than you as well. Eckler is another, similar case to McCaffrey where, he's an older running back. He's a guy that's, over the age and touch apex now, but he is still attached to an offense that's going to throw the ball a ton. He's probably a lock for 100 plus targets this year. And we know what he's done from a touchdown scoring standpoint the last 2 seasons as well. So Austin Eckler, a guy that I think should be okay. One of the few running backs that I think I'm okay with in the first round. And then I have Saquon Barkley also in this first round discussion. Again, similar to Diggs. I'm just going to assume that his contract situation is rectified at the moment, although that's probably less of a guarantee than Stephon Diggs right now, because he has voiced concerns that he wants to be extended, or, his camp is working on something. I tend to think that he actually will be extended before the season actually begins, because he's talking like somebody that understands the running back market, and he's not looking for a record-breaking $17 million per year type of contract. It sounds like if they offer him $14 million with 2 years guaranteed, he'll probably take it. So for me, Saquon Barkley, going into this season now, 3 years removed from his ACL tear, high target share, high, touchdown upside, high breakaway play upside with Saquon Barkley. The guys that I would take in the first round at running back are the ones that I just mentioned: Christian McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, Austin Eckler, and Saquon Barkley. Maybe you could get there with Jonathan Taylor if Anthony Richardson looks good early on in the preseason and looks like, he's going to be fine his rookie year. But I worry about the rookie quarterback, which is why I have him a little bit lower. And then A.J. Brown, the difference between him and Stephon Diggs and CeeDee Lamb, in my opinion, is Devontae Smith, and the fact that the Eagles are more of a run-heavy offense than the Bills and the Cowboys have been. Maybe the Cowboys take a little bit of a step back, but they also cut their leading ball carrier. So I'm assuming they're still going to be pass-heavy.
Yeah, 100%. And I am glad you mentioned that, because actually in the recent CGL that I did, you guys will be seeing this published on YouTube soon enough. But in the recent one that I did, he actually averaged, in terms of games that Dallas Goedert played, averaged about 17.2 PPR points per game and about a 27.35% target share. So for those worried, like, oh, well, with Dallas Goedert coming back, how's A.J. Brown kind of going to be affected? This is still a guy that's going to get 27+% of the targets on a top 5 level offense with the Philadelphia Eagles. So still high on him as well. Like you guys can see, he's still in my round 1 discussion right after those other wide receivers. The final guy in this tier, you mentioned I might have him lower, but Austin Eckler to me is the last running back that I fully feel comfortable with using a first round pick on. I honestly think that if you wanted to order any order of McCaffrey, Bijan, and Eckler, you can do so, because I expect it to come into the offseason like, oh, Eckler's going to be a top 5 projected pick based off what he did last year. People are going to get hyped on him, and I'll be out at that point. But if he's going to be a late first round pick, I have no problem taking the upside at that case. We know this guy's going to command targets. We know this Chargers offense is going to throw the ball about 700 plus times this year. And with Austin Eckler getting that exposure in the receiving game and getting that exposure to potential touchdown opportunity tied to Justin Herbert and this high octane offense, I want every part of it. And in terms of Austin Eckler this past year, people might be worried, well, in games where the wide receiver corps was fully healthy, like, how did he fare? Like, obviously we know he's a receiving running back, but if the targets aren't available when Mike Williams, Quentin Johnson, and Keenan Allen are on the field coming this year, how is he affected? Well, with Austin Eckler, when all of the wide receivers were healthy this past year, was still scoring over 21 PPR points per game, was his most efficient time as a rusher, and actually scored over a touchdown per game. Now, somebody might hear, touchdown per game, can't you expect some regression? Not really, when the guy scored so many touchdowns in the last 2 seasons, en route to being a top 3 overall running back in points per game each of the last 2 seasons. So for me personally, if you want to take him at the end of the first round, that's fine. I will say, though, I am a little bit wary if somebody said I want him at 5th overall.
Yeah, and I mean, we can expect the Chargers offense, if they somehow can stay healthy for the first time in like what seems like ever, to be one of the better offenses in the league. And if you got a lead ball carrier on the goal line for a good offense, you're probably going to be in good shape, especially when that guy is getting 100 targets on a season like Austin Eckler is getting. I think we can kind of like move into the second round again. Once we get into the second round, there's a number of guys here that I really like, but I think are, again, another layer of concern less than the guys that we already talked about. Davante Adams, I mean, we don't really know exactly what his situation is from, like, does he want to be there? Is Jimmy Garoppolo going to be the quarterback? But I still think he's probably like the second or third best receiver in the NFL. So as long as he's there and Jimmy Garoppolo's his quarterback, I'm comfortable taking him in the top 15. But right now, if you're doing best ball drafts or whatever, and you want to mitigate some risk by passing on Davante Adams in that area and waiting to see when his situation clears up, because I can't anticipate, even if Davante Adams is like an early to mid second rounder now, even if his situation clears up, he's going to be there. Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be his quarterback. I don't anticipate him going any higher than that. So it's probably fine if you just wanted to fade him for the time being. Then we have these two young receivers here, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Garrett Wilson. St. Brown has shown just like high target potential. Jared Goff just loves to throw him the ball. And I think he has a legitimate case to say he could finish as the wide receiver 1 overall. He's going into his third season. He's continuing to get better as a player. The Lions offense was top 5 in points per game last year. I think St. Brown, as long as he doesn't get hurt, which he did last year, he has a legit case to be the best receiver in fantasy. And Garrett Wilson, as long as Aaron Rodgers is the same player that we've seen over the course of his career, is going to be just fine, in my opinion. But we do have a little bit of concern that this could be the Russell Wilson situation all over again. But Garrett Wilson, I trust the player, and I trust Rodgers to be just fine. And then the tail end of this tier for me is like, I have Waddle here, but I'm a little like cautious on him just because he's not a high target share receiver. You have to rely on efficiency for him, and that depends on Tua being on the field and obviously Waddle being healthy and being the same efficient guy that he's been. But in terms of spike weeks in best ball, he's definitely the type of guy that you should spend a second round pick on. In managed leagues, maybe you want to wait till like the third round to go after him just because of the projection. Maybe is a little cleaner for somebody like Chris Olave or Calvin Ridley or somebody like that behind him. And then I have two running backs in this tier as well with Tony Pollard and Nick Chubb. Both guys that, with Pollard now, he's probably going to be the lead ball carrier on the goal line. Ezekiel Elliott had like 14 goal line carries last year. He's no longer there. Maybe they add somebody, but either way, Pollard is going to get the biggest workload of his career, presumably on the franchise tag. And then Nick Chubb, a guy that we've seen just be the better, running back than we've always said, because we are always lower on Nick Chubb. But for once, I feel like we're actually, where we need to be on Nick Chubb, because we're high on Deshaun Watson. And if we're high on Deshaun Watson and this offense looking better, then I think Nick Chubb can score a lot of touchdowns, and I think he can break away a lot of long runs like he always does.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of evaluation, and I'll just show my rankings as well. Like you kind of mentioned with Davante Adams, like talent-wise, you can argue this guy being a mid-first round pick, but given the situational uncertainty, given the uncertainty around even if Jimmy Garoppolo is going to even play this year, like there's reports that they can just get out of the contract, they can just void it if he fails his physical. So a little bit of concerns there from a situational standpoint. Obviously, the talent alone will get him into this early second portion, but if we hear some more stuff in terms of how Jimmy G's doing, if he's going to be playing this year, I can see him being even in this tier above with these clear round 1 type of guys. Garrett Wilson, this is a player that I'm extremely excited about going into the year. Obviously, that big time move for the Jets acquiring Aaron Rodgers, but this was a guy in Garrett Wilson last year that pretty much showed that outside of Zach Wilson, he was pretty much quarterback proof. A near 23% target share in games that Zach Wilson didn't play, en route to 17.4 PPR points per game. And that's still dealing with guys like Mike White last year. Now we plug in Aaron Rodgers. If this is anywhere close to the back-to-back MVP Aaron Rodgers we saw prior to this year, I honestly think early second valuation may be even too conservative on Garrett Wilson. I do think that, gun to my head, if I were to say the ceilings, pure ceiling cases of A.J. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Stephon Diggs, and Garrett Wilson, I'd pretty much say that all of them have the opportunity to be 21, 22 PPR points per game at the very apex if they were to hit it. Like if Aaron Rodgers plays top 5 to 8 level quarterback ball next year, I wouldn't be shocked if Garrett Wilson had 95 receptions, 1,400 yards, and 12 receiving touchdowns. It is in the range of outcomes given how efficient Rodgers was prior to this year. I do have Amon-Ra St. Brown in here as well, just an absolute target hog in the games that he was healthy last year, over 10 targets per game. So getting that in the early second seems like such a surefire profile that I don't think I can pass on at what would that be, the 203. Saquon Barkley, lead ball carrier. We expect this Giants team to be better in terms of expectations this year than what we thought of last year. And we know that Saquon Barkley, assuming the holdout is, figured out by the time the season starts, should be a 20+ opportunity per game type of bell cow running back. So taking him here, absolutely fine with that. And then with Jalen Waddle, like you kind of said, the pure raw target volume is a concern. I mean, this was a guy that even when Tua was healthy last year, only averaged 7.5 targets per game. But despite the low target volume, this was still a guy that gave you nearly 18 PPR points per game. Obviously, I do think the ceiling would be limited in comparison to Amon or Garrett Wilson, Devontae, and any of the receivers above, assuming Tyreek Hill is healthy. But you also have that potential implied value that if Tyreek Hill missed any time, you're getting an uber efficient wide receiver that could have wide receiver one type of volume in a very good offense for Miami. So that would close off my early second tier. You mentioned some of those running backs. I will quickly go rapid fire with them. Jonathan Taylor, we know the talent is there. Do have question marks in terms of his role on the offense, in terms of the receiving game, and potential offensive limitations with them over there in Indianapolis. I mean, this was a guy that, despite having a very strong workload this past year, averaged only about 14.41 PPR points per game when he was deemed healthy. And that was on about, what would that be, 23 opportunities per game. So a little bit concerned if they're not scoring touchdowns and he's not getting receptions, what exactly his ceiling in fantasy is. Tony Pollard would be the inverse. This is only pessimism in case they bring in added competition by the end of the year. But I do think if nobody is added to this backfield, Tony Pollard will be ranked above Jonathan Taylor for me. Tony Pollard will probably be in the early second tier for me. This is a guy with down the stretch last year on about 19 opportunities per game. Once Dak came back in week 7, was giving you about 21 PPR points per game, was a legitimate league-winning type of running back. So absolutely love Tony Pollard. And then finally with Nick Chubb, we just got to face the facts. We were low on this guy. This guy's now entering an offense that we can expect to be a lot better, assuming Deshaun Watson gets back to that top 5 to 8 level quarterback status he's shown in the past. We know Nick Chubb's an elite runner, and the actual target volume that he saw last year was a high that he's seen since his second year in the NFL. The previous 2 years, he saw 18 targets, 25 targets, and we saw last year, once Kareem Hunt declined, that target number jumped up to 37. So with Kareem Hunt fully out of town, I wouldn't be shocked if Kareem Hunt was closer to the 45, 50 target area than he was, the 25 target area he was prior to this year.
Yeah, I'm probably not counting on too many targets for Nick Chubb, but I do think he has a better upside case than I think I've ever said for Nick Chubb in years past. Which of course probably means he's going to fall off a cliff this year just because we're finally in on him. But let's close it out with the final tier of the video. We have the top 3 quarterbacks in this tier because Allen, Mahomes, and Hurts all bring a combination of rushing and elite passing to the table that sets them apart from the rest of the quarterbacks. And theoretically, a Lamar Jackson type would be in this area as well, but we have more concerns about his ability to stay on the field and that kind of thing. So to me, these guys are, put them in any which order. You want to put Hurts 1, put Hurts 1. If you want to put Mahomes 1, put Mahomes 1. If you want to put Allen 1, put Allen 1. All 3 of these guys are very strong options. Again, more so in best ball, I'm willing to take them in the second round. I think in a managed league, I'd probably want them in round 3, but I do think they're worth a second round pick, value above replacement wise. These guys can give you 4, 5, 6 games a year where they're scoring 30 points on a given week and single-handedly win you that week and average, 23, 25 PPR points per game. So all 3 of those guys are very, very strong options. For what it's worth, my tier would go well into the almost late 20s, early 30s here. There's guys that are not on this list that definitely worth mentioning, like Josh Jacobs. Some of the other receivers, T. Higgins and Devontae Smith could be in this area. Maybe you wanted to throw Mark Andrews in this area. Maybe there's a different running back. Maybe you're high on Derrick Henry. You could potentially throw him in this area. But I have Ramondre Stevenson and Chris Olave to close out this part. Ramondre Stevenson is a 3-down back, which is why I think he's very worthy to go in the second round. He gets, targets, he gets goal line work. The offense probably not going to be the greatest in the world, but if DeAndre Hopkins ends up signing there, maybe that improves the offensive output. Either way, you look at Ramondre Stevenson and you think this guy can get 80 targets and 250 carries. And if he gets that kind of workload, he's going to be a top 6 back. I think he's kind of almost like the new Najee Harris. Like what we thought of Najee Harris as a rookie is kind of the workload that Ramondre Stevenson has inherited, except he's actually quite good at forcing missed tackles and that kind of thing. And then Chris Olave is just like the lower version of Garrett Wilson. We've seen Derek Carr feed his number 1 receiver. We saw it very evidently with Devontae Adams last year. And Chris Olave showed the peripherals of any receiver that we've ever seen to show a huge ascension, a wide receiver 1 caliber profile. And I think if the Saints are a good offense, which is really my concern with Chris Olave, which is why I have him a little bit lower than Garrett Wilson or any of the other young receivers, he can be a stud, and he could absolutely still finish as a top 3 to 5 wide receiver in fantasy. It's just a question mark of, do we get 2021 Derek Carr or 2022 Derek Carr? Because if we get 2021 Derek Carr, that was his best season of his career, and the Saints will probably win the NFC South and win 10 or 11 games, and Chris Olave can be a top 5 receiver.
Yeah, no, I agree with that as well. I actually have pretty much 80% of this tier the same as you. I do have it as Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Chris Olave, and the only difference actually being Calvin Ridley, I do have as a late second round pick. Not to spend any more time on the quarterbacks, you guys know what their ceilings represent. Corey already outlined the case for Chris Olave, but I'll just kind of briefly outline why I have Calvin Ridley here. I do think come the end of the season, if this Jaguars offense does materialize to be as strong as we could potentially anticipate, I wouldn't be shocked if Calvin Ridley is close to putting up Stephon Diggs level numbers if he hits his prime ceiling, because the risk is there, of course. Calvin Ridley hasn't played last year. We don't exactly know what his role is going to be with the Jaguars. Jaguars obviously are a good projected offense, but aren't projected like the Bills or something crazy like that. If they do each hit their ceiling marks, Trevor Lawrence becomes a top 5 quarterback. Jaguars offense, one of the best offenses in the league, and Calvin Ridley reclaims his status as the wide receiver one of this team. Again, I wouldn't be shocked if this was a 1,500 plus yard, 10 plus touchdown wide receiver on one of the biggest league winning type of offenses in the entire NFL this year for fantasy. It kind of reminds me of what we anticipated once Jamar was drafted to the Bengals, the step that the Bengals potentially could take, only that we've seen Trevor Lawrence play elite ball to this point, and we were projecting it for Joe Burrow at that point, although he ended up taking the step.
Yeah, it almost reminds me, the bet on Calvin Ridley in the early third round kind of reminds me of the bet that you were making on AJ Brown last year in the early third round, the late
Yep.
second round area, because we had question marks about Jalen Hurts' ability to carry the offense. Obviously, he took a huge step forward and was like an MVP candidate. Trevor Lawrence is kind of a similar situation, only I think this, second year Trevor Lawrence heading into his third year is more of an established quarterback as a passer than Jalen Hurts was going into last year. And I think the Jaguars might be top 5, top 10 in pass attempts this year versus the Eagles, who were literally the most run heavy offense in the NFL the year before AJ Brown got there. So I think it's a similar bet to the one we were making on AJ Brown last year, except we've already seen Calvin Ridley finish as a top 5 receiver. We've already seen him be a league winner. We've already seen Trevor Lawrence show glimpses of elite passing play. And now it's in an offense that was top 10 in neutral pace pass rate and top 10 in pace of play in general. So as long as Ridley's the same player that we saw back the last time he finished as an elite player, I think this is going to be a steal. You're going to get, if he's the third player on your team and you can start your draft, Justin Jefferson, Tony Pollard, and Calvin Ridley, like your team is going to be absolutely absurd. So I really like the bet on Ridley. He's my 25. So he was literally the next player in my rankings as well.
For the record, his current underdog ADP is 32, and even that might be higher than what I expect in most home leagues. I expect most home leagues to be more pessimistic. Oh, he missed a year because he was gambling. Like, we hear all these narratives get thrown around in league chats, and when you get ready for your draft, people will be having their popcorn, their beers, and just talking whatever shit comes to their mind. I wouldn't be shocked in some of your home leagues if Calvin Ridley was a round 4 pick. And if that's the case, like, this is a guy I would take in the second round. So getting that type of value, like I said, 32nd overall player on underdog might go even later in your home leagues.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, when we look over this landscape, when we look over these players, I think to me the best spot to pick from is the first or the second overall pick, especially knowing that, some of these guys in the second and third round area are going to be on the board there as well. You can start your draft Justin Jefferson, get yourself, like we said, Tony Pollard, maybe one of the elite quarterbacks or something like that in the second round, and then tail it off with Stevenson, Olave, Ridley, Jacobs, some of the guys that T. Higgins, Devontae Smith that are going in the early third round area that we didn't talk about in this video. Let us know what you guys thought of this format. If you want us to go back to, kind of we used to go over our positional rankings that way. We definitely are open to feedback, and we're going to definitely break down our positional rankings for redraft, probably starting next week. We're going to do that, so stay tuned for that. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new around here. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Comment any of your thoughts down below. Check out our site, flockfantasy.com. Our best ball rankings are live right now. They both of ours have both been recently updated as well. So if you're doing underdog fantasy drafts and you want who we would go with and that kind of thing, you can definitely check that out. And if you want, obviously, to use these rankings right away, put them right into action. Best Ball Mania 4 right now, I think it's about 40% filled. So it's filling pretty quickly relative to last year's Best Ball Mania contest. So you definitely want to get in there ASAP. And if you haven't signed up on Underdog yet, use the promo code FSE for 100% back up to $100. If you put in $100, that's 4 Best Ball Mania 4 entries. Get your chance at $15 million in total prizes, $3 million to first place. If you use our promo code at sign up, that'll get you an additional free 4 entries into Best Ball Mania 4. Get yourself some exposure to some of these players in this big money tournament. It's a ton of fun. Me and Danny both are going to max enter it. So we'll definitely be praying that we take down the tournament, but you should definitely get some exposure to these guys as well. So with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.